Council study session for January 29th. Great to have you all here today. I will turn it over to our city administrator, Allison Zelms, to kick us off.
Thank you, Council President, Council members, Mayor Norton,
Recording in progress.
members of the team. I wanted to just note how exciting it is to be at the point to be able to bring forward this item about next steps and an update on the local sales tax extension that was approved at the ballot in November. So with that, I will turn it over to Aaron Parrish and team. We have been organizing to be able to get to this point to present to you to get some feedback on where we're recommending we go for next steps.
All right, Mayor, President, members of the council, really appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. We're going to give you a variety of updates and decision points on the local sales tax, but really designed to be an interactive conversation to get your feedback on where our opportunities are in this space. Of course, the sales tax was a key element of your strategic priorities and your action plan and the various goals that have driven the work that we've done in the affordable living space, economic vibrancy and growth management and quality service. And you'll see tonight from the team that's presenting that a lot of these important priorities that you've adopted are advancing through this very special opportunity that we have. Before we get into it though, I think one thing that bears mentioning is whether it was during the development of the idea on what our local sales tax wanted to be, advancing the legislation in order to successfully secure that portion of it, or working with the community to both educate and advocate in order to have this opportunity. There was just an amazing amount of work that was done in those spaces, and we have the privilege of being able to move forward with implementation. So we oftentimes move from thing to thing to thing to thing. But really just want to take this moment to offer thanks to the many elected and appointed officials that were involved in this important work. I'm not going to try to name all of those people because there's just an amazing amount of effort that went in by our city team, by our community partners. So, but it is important to celebrate the success we've achieved to date, and really just want to what we now have to offer thanks to the many elected and appointed officials to invest in the strategic priorities of Rochester. I'm not going to try to name all of those people. After that, just a little second of celebration for today. We want to talk about how we move forward. One thing, and this is the last you'll hear about it this evening, is we do have a local ordinance that you'll be asked to consider and adopt, basically codifying our sales tax. There won't be anything really incredibly interesting about that other than it is a requirement to evolve our existing 2012 ordinance in order to advance that. So you'll see that ordinance come forward in the next month or so. I'm going to cover a preliminary financing recommendation just based on our initial review and just emphasize that that's a working recommendation. And then we have a great team of people here to cover each of the four projects. So our Deputy Public Works Director, City Engineer Dylan Nabrowski will cover street reconstruction and where we're at with that. Our other Deputy Public Works Director in the Environmental Services space, Aaron Luckstein, will cover flood control and water quality. And then we have Irene Woodward, Community Development Director, here to talk about the Economic Vitality Fund. And then lastly, I'm just going to go with Parks teammate extraordinaire, Ben Bolt, because there'll be a forthcoming promotion that you'll all hear about in the not too distant future. But he's going to cover the regional sports and recreation complex and that work. And then after each of those sections, we're going to take a break for questions so we can not, save all those up for the end, that you can provide that feedback as you go along the way. So again, $205 million investment. We collect about $15 million per year. We're projected sometime this April to be closed out of our existing 2012-2013 tax, and then we'll transition and move forward with the next tax. So that brings us to the financing options and recommendations. Our preliminary recommendation is that we finance the regional sports and recreation complex. So issue debt for that $65 million and then do pay as you go for the other projects. Maybe with a little bit of slight nuance there, but we've tried to set aside an amount annually that each of those areas could invest in. You'll see more later about how the council approvals, et cetera, will work as those investments are made and how they work into the budget process in our normal, very conventional bidding environment. But as we looked at it and compared it against the alternative, which really was to do pay as you go for all of the projects, If you wanted to advance the regional sports and recreation complex, within the next 4 to 5 years, you really have a limited amount of investment you'd be making in those other three areas. I think there was some consensus amongst the staff that the work that was happening in those other areas is important, and we wanted to continue to develop momentum there. And so we are recommending, that the regional sports and recreation complex be financed. That would then leave $3.3 million per year for streets. Dylan will talk more about that. $3.3 million for economic vitality. Irene will cover more on some of the ideas happening in that space. And then $2.6 million annually for flood control, with a residual amount of $5.8 million per year available to service regional sports and recreation center debt. I want to emphasize that any interest we pay on the debt doesn't count toward the $205 million. So we're talking about a principal amount of a project of still $65 million in that scenario. The other thing we really wanted to talk with our financial advisor about is that amongst all the various plans we have for debt issuance and financing, that we're not putting our AAA bond rating in jeopardy, and just that we're continuing to be good stewards of public funds. So that's the working recommendation. Happy to chat more about that at the end. But that's the working idea right now. So with that, unless there's any kickoff questions that you have, I'm happy to turn it over to our Deputy Public Works Director, City Engineer Dylan, to go through streets.
Oh, Councilman.
Just make sure I understood what you said about the debt service. I come prepared to support that recommendation so that we can get moving on that. But did you say that would not be part of the sales tax? How would that be paid, the debt on the?
Yeah, just so any interest that we accrue when we issue that debt can go above the 205 million. So let's just, at a hypothetical, say you're going to pay $10 million of interest. You can then collect $215 million of sales
Okay,
tax.
it still comes out of sales tax. It just doesn't count against the dollar totals.
Correct. We have a
Okay.
principal amount of 205 million.
Good. I was just clarifying that it was not like paid by some other account.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. With that, we'll turn it over to Dylan.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, President, members of the council, thank you for having me here this afternoon to kind of kick off the first project of 4, which is our street reconstruction. Just kind of setting the table, as we presented this as one of the 4 projects. With street reconstruction, you see that a number of our streets are 50 years or older, which we like to get 50 years minimum out of our streets as we're doing design and ongoing preservation work. As well as we have nearly a quarter of our streets currently rated as poor or fair condition. I'll get into a little bit more of that detail. And that number only continues to go up every year as we rate our pavements. So with this project and the sales tax revenue that we will be bringing in, obviously it's, to address that deteriorating and aging infrastructure related to roadways in the community. And just also to remind people, currently we have 30,000 commuters. That number is going to grow to over 50,000. It's projected to grow by 2040. So that's more vehicles, more loading on our pavements, more need for that infrastructure. So as we've done our last pavement study, looking at the next 50 years, we would have, and maybe I'll stop here, we have nearly 500 miles of existing roadway that are our local streets. So we would be, 350 plus in poor condition if we don't do anything about that as we continue moving forward. For some of you who were here in 2019, that was the last time we updated our pavement management plan. And when we looked at that, there's a fairly large unfunded liability when we think about our street network. Currently, our need is around $24 to $30 million a year for pavements as we look at the projected 50-year lifespan of all of our roadways. And when we did that study, 16 to 20 million was our current gap as we looked at our need. So again, I want to remind you that, as we get into the details here, and Aaron noted, 3.3 million a year coming in for streets. We're not closing the gap, so this isn't going to solve the problem. We're very fortunate. Our roadways are, as we as I drive around the state or even other states and through communities, we do a really nice job in Rochester, and we have done a great job, and our maintenance team is a big piece of that as we think of the preservation work we've done. However, we're getting to that point where we will see more aging pavements, and there's going to only be more need for that. So again, this project over the projected 16, 17 years of revenue based on the current projections, $50 million, around 3 million a year. It's really going to help address the need, not only for our community members, but the people who visit and travel into the community over the course of that time. I see the mayor.
Mayor Norton?
So I guess I'm curious, given that we know we have really bad roads throughout the city, and we're only at least the concept here is only 3 million a year. If you had 5 million, could you do that in a year? Or is 3 million all you can spend in a year?
Well, I mean, we would have to look at other funding alternatives. So currently we're talking about doing the pay-as-you-go method. We don't see the benefit in advancing, that's only gonna get us a little bit of a large community need. So, right now we're projecting to spend it as we receive it annually. And I'll get into this in more detail, but there may be even a time where we have a larger project where we want to save 2 years worth, like we sometimes do with our state aid revenue, or we'll get 2 years of federal funding like this next Broadway project to do a project. So currently we're just projecting to finance it as we receive the revenue.
But we have choices on how much revenue we allocate for it. And we know roads is something that desperately needs to be done. So I'm kind of looking at if you can, I don't want to say physically do, but do you have the staffing to do more than $3 million worth of projects? If there was like, say, 5 million or 6 million to spend, could you do that a year in the construction cycle?
It's possible. We'd have to look at our team and what that current year's, all the other projects in the CIP. My guess with all the other private work coming in and the permitting reviews, planning reviews, oversight is we probably won't have capacity. However, when we see those challenges, that's the point where we will engage a consultant to understand if we can better deliver it, sooner. And we could use a consultant.
I'm fully anticipating more staffing needs in our community with all we have going on. So, yeah, thank you.
So just to back it up and give a brief overview of, the pavement management plan we completed. As we look at so AC is asphalt concrete, it's our bituminous roadways, our blacktop. These next two charts just show you the deterioration of a pavement over time. So you see that bituminous roadways if we don't do anything, 40 years, you're lucky to get 40 years out of a bituminous pavement by doing nothing. It just shows you how the pavement degrades over time. Concrete pavements, you tend to get a little bit longer length of time, but this is just showing you if we are doing nothing to address our need in the community. Those two charts I just flipped past. Currently, and this is why many of our roadways look like they're in great condition because we've done a great job with our mill and overlays and chip seals, but obviously those don't address the subgrade that with the repeated loadings over 50 years of a pavement, that subgrade starts to, break down and you start to get settlement, rutting, and issues that you can't just address with a mill and overlay or a chip seal. So current practices, as we rate our pavements, 60 and above is really a do nothing with some surface treatments, crack filling, potholes if they pop up. Fair, that's when we start to get into the preservation work that we're doing annually when you're approving our mill and overlay and chip seal projects. When it gets below 30, it's really becomes a full-on rehabilitation and or reconstruction project where we're not digging the entire roadway up, we're reclaiming all that pavement, replacing the base, and then paving. So that's been our current practice. And like I said, our pavements are in pretty great condition as we compare ourselves to others, but still there's that unfunded liability and gap I noted earlier. Just some visuals to give you a feel for as we're rating pavements. PCI is pavement condition index. I didn't note that earlier. This is a useful graphic that shows you here's what will happen if we don't do anything. So we always like to share this. If you look at the red, that kind of mimics those earlier two graphs. Do nothing, the pavement degrades fairly quickly. But if you come in and you do a small project every so often based on how we program out that preservation work, you see that green line and it increases. So our pavement condition increases, starts to slowly deteriorate. Our team does another project, slowly deteriorates. The more we can do that, the longer we can extend the life of our pavements to address, these issues I'm talking about today. So as our team is, again, Aaron noted, we're very thankful to the community that the sales tax has passed. So as we've started to look at how do we now start to plan to spend this money, the first thing we'd like to do, because I mentioned it's been since 2019, we'd like to update our pavement management plan, hire a consultant to do that work, to again understand that 24 to 30 million dollar number I would anticipate going up, but we need to dig into the details of our current pavement conditions and update the plan. We would then start to look at our current CIP. We've already started doing this, but looking where we can transition, there's a lot of our state aid corridors we've identified to spend that state aid revenue that we can now, because those roadways are more regional, many of them, transition some of the, 3 million a year of the sales tax funding, which we can then, it doesn't mean we're going to do less to that other project. We're able to then essentially do $3 million more work. We can take some of that state aid money, put it on more of the less regional state aid routes. Potentially then we free up some more work to do neighborhood projects because we're not using as much of the street preservation and reconstruction dollars that we put towards our state aid projects. So there's a little bit of a domino effect where we're able to do an additional project a year, advance a project, 1-2 years as we program this into our CIP. As I noted earlier, 3 million is what we're projected to receive. If we think it's better to wait a couple years, we'll bring that back to you. And I do have a slide here at the end before we get to questions. I don't want you to think we're just here today telling you what we're going to do and you don't ever get to act on it. Any project, just like we have with any capital improvement project, it's going to come back before the city council for review and approval, whether it's, as we're getting ready to look at feasibility or it's being awarded for construction, depending on where we're at. But it'll come back multiple times before for action by council. So I don't want you to think we're just operating in a vacuum. But I went through that fairly quickly, hit all the highlights. Ready for questions if you have them.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Wall.
Thank you. You have such a non-anxious presence about you. If I were to project a 16 to 20 million dollar gap every year and I could plug it with 3.3, I'd be more anxious than you. Why, how are you so confident standing there?
Well, I mean, we know what we're up against. Thankfully, like I noted earlier, our team has done a great job. So we have been able to preserve pavements and we'll continue to do that work. We've always known that we have the gap. We're doing our best to try to spend the money most diligently and in the most efficient ways we can to address the need. But we've tried things, we've supported street improvement districts, with other cities around the state and the league and tried to change legislation to get other opportunities for revenue. That has never been successful. So, we'll continue to look at ways to bring more revenue. Thankfully, we've been able to acquire some grant funding, but that again, that's sometimes one-time funding. It's not ongoing in perpetuity. So I guess I'm thankful I look unnerved, but it is a challenge and it will continue to be.
All right, Councilmember Palmer.
Thank you. You flipped in poor and fair at the same percentage. What is your poor percentage?
I'd have to get back. That is on the lower end right now. It's more in the single digits and the fair is, but again, if we continue to every year rate the payments, the poor is going to creep up and also, and that's going to be in the double digits. Okay. Based on the age of our pavements.
Okay, so if you go to slide 12.
Which one? Oh,
Eh,
here we
let's
go. I
see.
see it.
There you go. So the top left is about Elton Hill School. That was probably built in the 50s. The one on the right is Morris Hills, and that was built in the
Early 2000s, maybe?
early 2000s, but we had poor soils and we didn't do anything about it. The one on the left is on First Avenue, and that was redone recently. That's a downtown one. And then the one on the right is a law frontage on 52, which is probably 70 years old. I don't remember that being rebuilt when we did
I can't,
52.
I'd have to look at the Rock 52 plans from.
Okay.
Years
My,
ago.
my point being is I don't consider our roads to be in poor shape. I think that we've done a good job of investing in them. Where we get into a problem is that we have some that we brought in from the township, which that doesn't have curb and gutter. And that brings our poor ones down, rating because they were not built to our standards. So, I think this is a good investment. I'm glad that you're doing it. My understanding is that none of this money will go to traffic calming. Is that
That's
correct?
correct.
So, that's a shame because I think traffic calming is something that I think every city council member hears is a need.
However, I would say, while it would not go into the neighborhood traffic calming, every time we're doing a project, we're looking at ways we can, change that roadway, not only the design speed, but the speed that people want to drive, and look at traffic calming options on any project that we're doing.
Okay, but again, my comment about the township roads we brought in, I think that hits more of our poor than the rest of them. So I think Public Works does a great job of mill and overlay, and I think plowing the streets makes a huge difference. So you don't get that frost and the heave and so that's a big investment that pays off in the long term.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Keen.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. Councilmember Palmer brings up a good point that the 50 years is a good, baseline. It's good to watch it. I know we did a study probably back in 2020 that we had an engineering firm come in and try to rate the roads. So there is a little bit of there's some controversy of 50 years and then they need to be replaced. I think that it's usage dependent, how well we build them, things like that. And we do a fair amount. We approved last Monday chip seal and some other sort of ongoing maintenance and certain mileage. So I'm supportive of the plan, and at the 3.3 million, I think it will add, it'll help us keep up in a better way. I guess I did want to ask City Deputy Administrator Parrish about, we've done some other things over the time. We talked about franchise fees and things like that to help with our streets. Are we walking that back or just sort of keeping it in the background, or where are we with that kind of funding?
Yeah, so I mean, we've had this conversation many times in terms of how do we fund, and there's not one answer here. And so to the 16 to $20 million annual deficit, we also have some projected increases in our CIP just for property tax levy support. Again, there's a variety of other sources that we try to bring into the conversation. Maybe the bigger one, absent some better legislative opportunity, has been, should we ever consider a natural gas franchise fee? And could you program that into streets? I think we decided in the last conversation a few years ago that we would prioritize additional investment in the local sales tax space. Natural gas franchise fee is a very doable thing for us. It has a good alignment with the right of way. You're working in the right of way. Natural gas lines impact that. But it's, be quite the community conversation too. So we just want to make sure, if we ever look at that, or if you want to look at additional options, we certainly bring that forward, but we haven't been doing any active work on that right now.
That's good. And I actually wouldn't support it right now. I think if you look at our other, getting the sales tax through and being able to absorb this into our budgets. And when I look at our other strategic initiative of affordable living, those fees get passed on to our residents pretty quickly. So I like the way we're going about this. And one of the, I just want to make sure, like we do chip seal work, we do these other things, we do neighborhood plans. I believe there's some state laws that the way we portrayed we're going to do this, we must use it on city streets, on rebuilds, not on other sort of projects that we come up with.
Are you asking about the sales tax dollars?
I'm talking about sales tax, and to make sure we're following the rules of which we got the money and we don't end up using it even slightly different than we projected to the state.
Yeah, the legislation says it's regional in nature, so
Okay.
it doesn't define regional, but our team is, I think, as we think about the different roadways and the commuters that come into it's pretty easy to look at trip distribution in the community and understand which ones are regional. So yeah, it's not gonna be for your neighborhood street.
Right, right. That's, again, I know there was some aspects to that, but again, the good news, the higher level story here is we're getting extra money into the pot and it will help us over the years.
Correct.
Thank you.
I'll just quickly say thank you to your team. This seems like a good approach and something we have to continue staying on top of as well as possible. I think it also emphasizes the importance of our other strategies around multimodal transportation and trying to reduce the impact on our roads, which are incredibly expensive to maintain, and we don't have the resources to continue and endlessly funding road reconstruction. So just appreciate Public Works' approach to thinking through all those pieces.
Thank you.
Ms.
Oh.
Helms?
I just wanted to piggyback onto the calmness comment. It's very good to have calm and methodical work when you're talking about an extensive system of roadways, because as we add a new cadence to the life cycle of the roads, at some point, we likely will need to maintain that cadence. And so if we were to really accelerate a lot of roads, there will be a point about 50 years from now where a future council will have a major challenge with that bucket of many, many roads. So it is actually really important to be methodical and thoughtful about it. And the concepts here are everywhere. If you maintain and continue to do the overlays and the pavement, et cetera, you're pushing that useful life out and out and out before you get to the very expensive reconstruction. And so all of this just adds the ability to do that. So appreciate that the council is seeing the plan.
Okay, if there's
Mr.
no further
Dombrowski?
questions, I will turn it over to our Deputy Director in Environmental Services, Aaron.
Right. Welcome.
Thanks, Dylan. Mayor, President Carlson, council members, it's good to be with you today. Again, my name is Aaron Luckstein. I'm the Deputy Public Works Director for Environmental Services. One of those responsibilities is the flood control network, and I share that responsibility with Mike Nickberg and the Parks team. So, but I have the opportunity to present to you this afternoon. This slide should look familiar. We presented this to council when we started the endeavor to look at the local option sales tax. We also shared this when we were talking with external parties as advocating for these funding source. And so really to boil it all the way down, the goal of this funding is to support the continued investment into the existing flood control system, as well as expand it as needed to mitigate any potential impacts of floodwaters. We also built in specifically water quality as an essential part of that. And the reason that comes into play is as we evaluate how do we effectively address the impacts of floods, there's things that we can do that not only provide rate control and protection, but can also provide water quality improvement. And so we've coordinated those together. And as we evaluate projects, specifically, we'll look for that water quality piece within those investments. And so some of the integrated projects that you'll see come forward in the future is regional detention basins. So stormwater ponds that slow down water that is entering, coming into the city. It allows sediment that is sediment and nutrients that are in that stormwater to then settle to the bottom. And then you allow the quote unquote treated stormwater to discharge out the outfall. So that's a good example where we can integrate those types of things. When we do stream bank stabilization measures, we can also use things like green infrastructure, green plants, things like that to hold the soil in place. By holding the soil in place, and you not only hold the soil, you hold nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, things like that, that can cause water quality impacts and can also help buffer some of the temperature and things like that. So we can partner those two things together moving forward. And there was $40 million that was approved as part of that. As we worked through, especially with the public on communicating about the flood control system, it became very clear a lot of people were confused as to what is part of our normal stormwater management system and what is truly the flood control system and flood control network. And so we worked with our GIS department to put together a story map, which is publicly facing and available. It talks through the history of the floods and the impact that it had, what is considered part of the flood control system, the current protection that flood control system protects and areas that it provides or is currently protecting and future areas. And it also identifies like what's the difference between a levee and a flood wall, a conveyance channel, all these different things that people don't necessarily recognize. And so good example is right outside of this government building, the flood walls that are within the network, the large concrete walls that we see there versus the conveyance channels that you see upstream coming through Soldiers Field Golf Course. And if you go even further back by Highway 52, and Trader Joe's in there, there's a levee. And I have a picture of it actually in there with the concrete walls where you're allowing water to flow through, but it can also hold back waters to create more storage capacity. So we're explaining that to the public and what's part of that system. The other thing, I guess I'll back up really quick, just to remind folks that the current flood control system that was constructed in the 80s and 90s protects over $1.5 billion in assets. So that was some of the existing infrastructure and buildings that were in place when it was constructed, but also the redevelopment that has been allowed because of having that system in place. And that's a conservative estimate based on property tax valuations. And so we know the system protects more than what we looked at as part of that, but we didn't want to exaggerate the numbers. So it protects even more than that $1.5 billion in assets. So just a reminder too, that in 1989, we did have a local option sales tax that was approved that provided kind of the initial funding source that created a reserves which we have used to maintain and build out the existing flood control system since that time. When there was approximately $30 million that was generated. Part of that sales tax included completing the construction of it, as well as providing some of these long-term operation and maintenance funds. We do have approximately $12.2 million still in reserves. We've not knowing what the outcome of this local option sales tax would be. I mean, and over the history of this, we've really tried to watch how these funds are used and really protect that because otherwise we'd have to pull from stormwater utility fees or levy or things like that to levy funds to provide this maintenance. So we've allowed those reserves to continue to build to always have a pot of money there. The initial intent of that was to be used for flood control related improvements, repairs, and then the operating and maintenance expenditures. And then the 2023 approval was for 40 million, and it did specifically authorize for the continued funding of that existing flood control system, the expansion of the system, and then as I noted, the inclusion of water quality improvement projects within that. So the fund management plan that we put together, we have the 40 million that will be coming in, approximately 3.3 million as Aaron had indicated, plus the existing 12.2 million that is already in there. We are looking to be able to kind of combine those funds and treat them as one versus having to track the two separately because of the approval allowed us to do that. Our annual operating and maintenance expenses are approximately $800,000 per year. That does fluctuate based on weather conditions and the amount of work that we need to do, but that's kind of the average. And that does come forward to council on an annual basis or now biannually with the budget approval. We think it's important that we always have an emergency fund available that in the event of a significant wet weather event, that we have revenue that we can access to be able to provide that immediate support to the community, whether it's addressing structural integrity issues, doing flood cleanup, things like that, where we don't have to wait for federal funding or other funding sources to be provided. We'll have that in an emergency fund readily available. We're recommending a minimum of 4 million in there. Obviously, we'd want to keep more in there than that, but that's always that benchmark that we're looking for. Going forward, anticipated uses, a big chunk of it will be used for sediment removal. That's within the reservoirs itself. City of Rochester actually owns and operates 6 reservoirs. The county does own and operate 1 as part of the initial system that was built out. But within those 6, they do fill up with sediment. Thankfully, with the work of the Soil and Water Conservation District, the amount of sediment reaching them has actually been reduced or lower than what was initially estimated. So we hopefully have another 10 to 15 years before we have to go in and start doing that, but we'll continue to watch those levels and then remove that sediment as needed. And then within the river system itself, we'll need to dredge. So again, just right outside this building, it's filling in with sediment. That needs to be removed every 5 to 7 years. So that's an ongoing maintenance. Actually, this winter, right now, we're removing sediment up by Highway 52 and that levee that I previously mentioned. And so removing that sediment as it enters the system. Within the Willow Creek channel area, there was some pretty significant impacts during the 2019 flood event. And so there's some stream bank improvements and channel improvements that we need to do there. And so the picture in my bottom right, I guess, that you can see, that's actually the flood impacts that happened in that Wood Lake Drive area because water was not able to successfully convey through that area at the rate that it needed to prevent flooding. So we'll work to address that. Some other examples are increased flood storage capacity. So example of that, you've hopefully heard me talk about that, as a Section 7 pond up in Northwest Rochester. It'll be just south of the Douglas Trail by 60th Avenue, kind of between 55th Street and 65th Street. So that in that Kings Run watershed, the city has kind of developed on the eastern portion of that watershed. That's a large watershed that heads towards Byron, and there's a significant amount of water that flows through there. And again, in 2019, there was pretty significant flood impacts as that hit that Kings Run area. If you remember, that was there's a memory care facility and it was near evacuation because the flood waters was right on the doorsteps of that facility. And so we're looking at adding storage capacity upstream, rate control, slow those waters down. And again, we'll continue to work with Soil and Water Conservation District 2 on other measures they can do up in the watershed. And then just another example of projects that we do, and that's the reestablishment of the floodplain. So the big part of this, and so an example of that is, I would say, by the Apache Mall. If you look in there, there's a lot of grasses that you can see within that area soil that's meant to be there, but that moves. And as that fills in, if you think about it as a glass of water, if you keep putting sand in the glass of that water, pretty soon you don't have much storage capacity left. So we'll go in there, we'll remove some of the sediment, we'll reshape it, make sure the water can flow through there in a way that doesn't cause erosion and keeps that area cleaned out. And so those are examples of how that fund will be used over the next, hopefully, 30 plus years. That's the other piece I would like to emphasize. What we looked at is once the revenue that's generated as a part of this comes in, that's not the end of it. We're looking to continue to build these reserves just like we did the first time, so it can extend well beyond the life of the local option sales tax before either the city needs to either renew that or pursue levy or stormwater, other funding sources to maintain this long term into the well into the future. So like Dylan, sorry, we got these slides a little bit out of order, but again, this isn't the last time council will see this. Each of the projects will come forward either as part of the capital improvement plan, individual projects in the RCA. You will see, like in the capital improvement plan, we have kind of a line item for like dredging, $1 million for dredging. That's what we do for like the Highway 52 dredging we're doing right now. We'll pull from that versus always needing to bring, those individual projects forward. But if they're a bigger project like Silver Lake, that'll be a larger, approximately $5 million one that will come forward, specifically to council. The annual budget process will be all the maintenance funds associated with that, and then the annual report to council on how those funds are being used. So with that, I will take any questions or any feedback you have.
Right, Mayor Norton.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm trying to get my head around this, and I'm going to ask some questions just to see if I'm understanding this correctly. So we're going to be collecting a little bit every year from local option sales tax up to 40 at the end. I'm looking for, kind of like Dylan said, every year we're going to spend 3 million. I'm hearing two things, and so I want to make sure I understand them. I hear we're going to put the 40 million and 12 million, which you already have, in a pot for the future, but also we're collecting local sales tax from folks now. And so I'm hoping that you can help me understand the difference between this list that you have. How many of these are like CIP and things like operations and maintenance, which I assume you can't use lost for, but I could be wrong on that. And then what are the annual things you'll be spending local option sales tax on versus what's in your CIP and your regular annual expenses? I'm not understanding it. I kind of got what Dylan was saying, but I don't see this being explained the same way. So I'm trying to parallel them.
Yep, great question. Sorry for that confusion up front. Should have clarified that a little bit better. So we spend approximately $800,000 in maintenance every single year. So that comes through the line item for our budget. It is our interpretation that we can use local option sales tax dollars for that. And the reason is we were very specific when we talked with legislators about that. And the language that got approved, it said notwithstanding then the restrictions that that fund did provide. So anyway, it is our intention to use that for operation and maintenance going forward. The capital, and so then in regards to the capital projects, we right now spend approximately $1 million in capital projects on an annual basis. However, as I mentioned, like the Silver Lake dredging project, that's going to be over $5 million just to do dredging. So that'll be one that comes forward. Obviously, we're spending more than $1 million on that to draw it down. So it is going to vary from year to year based on the number of capital projects that we bring forward. But that's kind of the average and why we came up with when we looked at the 40 million, it was an estimated 30 years versus operation and maintenance and some of these capital projects with the additional 12 million that's already in there.
So, and I
answer
had
your
heard,
question?
yeah, it kind of gets to it. I'm just trying to figuring out your budget and how the local option sales tax fits in. And what I hadn't assumed is it would be supplanting funds you had currently been using with local option sales tax. And it sounds like if we're using it for operations and you normally budget 800 for operations, that 800 is free to do something else with now in the budget, if I'm understanding correctly. Nope.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's the way it works.
Well,
Yeah,
I
Mayor,
can
President,
vote
members
on
of
it.
council, understand it's confusing, but
Yep.
if you really think about it, our existing sales tax from 1989, I believe it was referenced in there. We've been funding those $800,000 per year out of operations with that sales tax. This in essence just is a continuation of what we have been doing, realizing with the $5 million dredging of Silver Lake and some of these other capital projects, our 12 million was going to be getting down to zero. We were projecting in 2026, 2027, that we were going to be out of those funds. So this really just gives us the opportunity to extend that for both operational and capital investments as we move forward. So I wouldn't say supplanting because, you know, we were utilizing sales tax for that in the past, and I think we're just going to continue that practice. And I think Aaron also has a few items here in a moment just about like some guidance we've created in the past in this space as well.
Yeah, that's actually quite helpful. I had not understood in our past budget, we were using local option sales tax for operations. So that's like an aha for me. And we have asked for more monies to continue on. And so I guess I was surprised to find out we have 12.2 million in there because we've been talking about dredging forever and a day and how expensive it is. And I know it would have, pretty much depleted, a significant amount of these funds, but when, we haven't been dredging, we've talked about it forever. When are we going to dredge? And we don't have to wait for the 40 million. We've got 12. So just looking for a timeline on that too, while you're here.
Good question. I don't have our capital improvement plan in front of me. I know we had planned to do dredging by the government center either next year or the following year. And then similar with Silver Lake, I can't remember if that was 2025 or 2026. We have those kind of tentatively slated in the capital improvement plan. I just don't have those dates in front of me right now. And you're right, what we had noted with that 12 million. So that is looking at our projected capital improvement plan for between now and 2027, 2028, in addition to the annual operation and maintenance. That's when we were going to run out of money. And so we have the last 2 years been very, very frugal with these dollars, not knowing if this would pass, because then we needed to adjust and come up with some other funding sources. Very thankfully that this was approved, and thank you for your support and your efforts. That now allows us to start doing some of those projects that we've pushed about as far as we possibly could go to that comfort level, but we didn't want to spend those dollars all the way down, not knowing if this would pass or not. So.
We do plan for the dredging in our CIPs. However, the team also does annual monitoring. And so they'll assess the level of sediment buildup. And so, you're not trying to get in there too early, you know, but so it's based on a projected time frame for when the dredging's needed, which is very soon. But I just also think there's a minor note there is that it's an annual evaluation to determine, you know, what kind of flood storage capacity we have in those different channels.
On that note, one of the things that's been brought up at the DMC board is as we focus on redeveloping our riverfront, we really want to have a riverfront we can enjoy being by. So could you just, for all of our sakes, talk a little bit about what dredging right here in front of the government center would do? Is there some rechanneling that would happen? How are we really encouraging that river to flow again?
Yep, good question. Actually, there's a couple pictures on here that you can see of dredging that has occurred just right outside the windows here. So big part of that is actually just removing the sediment so that you don't see as much of it, you know, visually when you look within there. We will also reshape it. So as it flows through, you know, there will be some sediment and some vegetation that'll be reestablished when the work is done. It won't just be, you know, concrete walls. We'll kind of shape it through there.
Okay.
But a big part of it is just removing that. This entire stretch was actually the prior to even the flood control system being installed was a natural settling point for the river. And so when they designed the system, they took that into consideration and used that, which is why this is now a design dredging area with the ramps to be able to have access with the dump trucks and the backhoes and things like that. So using how the river initially reacted and allowed sediment to settle out, but also taking advantage of it so we can access the river. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think we could get some messaging out to some of my DMC board colleagues. That would be really helpful,
Okay.
like you just said.
Absolutely.
All right, Councilmember Wall.
I believe that the mayor's question substantially covered what I would ask, so I'll pass.
All right, Councilmember Palmer.
Thank you. And so you dredge this about every 3 to 5 years. That's the way it was designed right outside the window here. Is my understanding.
It's been about every 5 to 7 years, but yes.
Okay. And then Silver Lake dredging is going to take place 24, 25. What are we? Because I don't want to have a flood and then have people go, wow, we missed it. I mean, I know that we've done some design work on it. So are we 25 on the CIP?
Can I clarify which, are you talking right outside?
No, I'm talking about Silver Lake.
Silver Lake.
Yes.
So at this point, again, I would have to look at the capital improvement plan. I can't remember where we have
Okay.
that slated.
Could
I
you
think
go
it was
about,
for
could you go back
2025,
about
but-
4 slides for me on your presentation,
Mhm.
please?
Which slide?
Go back. Oops. On this one on the upper right, how is that considered? Is that a flood control project there, the upper right?
This is considered a flood control reestablish or erosion control project.
And how does that qualify for flood control?
So within this, the stream bank here had eroded all the way up, I believe, up to that trail. Deposited a large amount of sediment downstream, and so we reshaped that, reestablished that bank, so that the river would flow without causing that future erosion.
And then we got some DNR money for that also.
I don't recall off the top of my head.
Can you go back one more slide, I think? I got one more question for you. Okay, so that picture there. So are you telling me that when we go upstream and have some more retention ponds, that this chocolate will be blue?
No, I'm not telling you that.
And how do we get this chocolate to be blue?
We don't want it over the city in general.
There will always be sediment within floodwaters.
But isn't our goal to get some of that taken care of upstream than in through the city?
Absolutely. So yes, our goal is to continue to work with our partners out in the watershed to reduce the amount of water that flows through Rochester and at a water quality that is improved compared to what it is today. We'll also do, you know, our part within the city, our stormwater management program. And our stormwater management requirements are a big part of holding sediment back, keeping it on the soil, minimizing the amount of sediment that reaches our water bodies. And if it does, hopefully it ends up in a detention pond where it can settle out, and then we can remove it in a controlled manner and reuse it.
So I'm going to go back to my understanding of the funding of this. So back when we started with the original sales tax, they put a pot of money in, said, here, this is going to be for maintenance and taking care of it. And so really, you can almost say no property tax goes to the flood control project. Would that be right? Or majority of it is paid for out of that, not from property tax?
Yes, the maintenance of the flood control system is provided as part of the initial 1989. So there was a sales tax in 1982 that helped pay for the construction of the
Right.
system. Another one in 1989 that finished out that system and then has been used for the annual operation and maintenance as well as the capital projects associated with the flood control system. Now, whether there was some cost sharing, some of these projects, that I can't speak to the entire history of that, but yes.
So
that
if
was
it
the
didn't
intent.
pass, in all likelihood, this would have ended up being on the property tax. Not your call, but that's kind of the,
Potentially.
yes, thank you.
Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, I feel for my peers up here because I have the benefit of being on the South Zumbro Watershed Joint Powers. And we've spent a lot of time on this over the last couple of years of understanding not only the funding, but the risks involved and the new risks that didn't exist 30 and 40 years ago. And so I understand how that's working. And so again, this was one of the main ones for me to get passed through the sales tax. And it's especially important in some of you talked about some of the southern neighborhoods that had issues in 2019, and some of that should be covered or should be able to step up to those now. The one thing that financially and is still a bit confusing to me is we have flood control systems, and then we have stormwater, and we have a separate stormwater controls with funding. And it doesn't appear we're merging them over time and having one system. Can you give any high level comments on that? Or is there, that something's a stormwater or flood control project versus stormwater? Or to me, it would be flooding and it would be a problem and I wouldn't know which bucket's being pulled from, but it appears you have to keep track of them differently.
Correct. We do have to keep track of them differently, and that's largely because of the restrictions related to the funding. So
Okay.
based on the 1989 local option sales tax approval, we were limited in how we could use those funds. And so that's where, again, we've specifically identified what was constructed as part of the flood control system, very clear.
Yep.
Part of the 1982 and then the 1989 funding. And then only using dollars when it has an impact on those. Now, keeping in mind that there was some flexibility in that to build out the flood control system. So some of the work that was done in the Cascade Lakes
Yep.
area, flood control money was used there. And part of that was envisioned when they initially did it, but they had to make some cuts.
Yep.
Initially there was going to be a reservoir further out in Cascade Creek and there just wasn't enough funding. So they had to prioritize and built what they did. And so like Cascade Creek, when there was the extension of that project, there was some conveyance work that was done. The lake dredging, some of the money that was used was flood control. And one of the things that Aaron had mentioned is the city does have a guidance document on how those funds can be used. I didn't include it in the presentation and I apologize for that, but that's what we do use when a project comes forward. We look at, is it part of the existing system or was it envisioned to be part of the existing system
Okay.
and could not be built because there was a lack of funding? Does it align with the legislative approval, conditions that were provided at that time?
No.
And if not, then we don't use those funds.
Good.
No.
This is helpful. I was
Yep.
just looking for, again, that difference between the two. And but partly I wanted to make the point that again, it's good that we have this flood control and we're continually not just maintaining it, but what does it really need to be? But I guess following up on the other questions there, all of our residents, property owners do pay into stormwater management. And that's collected not through levy taxes, but through our utilities. And it is something that we all contribute to. It's called a fee and not a tax, but doesn't look that much different to the average homeowner.
Absolutely. Yep. And a good example of how that is used is in Kings Run after the 2019
Yep.
flood event, there was some resizing of manholes, culverts within road systems that needed to be rebuilt. We used stormwater for that. We also added a couple stormwater detention ponds up in that area, even though it was a result of flood impacts.
Yep.
That was
That's
not
the little
initially
nuances that
envisioned,
can-
and so we use stormwater funds to help address those issues where it's providing both flood control benefit, but also meeting the stormwater.
Well, I appreciate you're there to make sure we get them right. But thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Great work. On to the next.
Council President, Mayor, members of council, thank you. I'm here to present on economic vitality. You have seen this slide a few times, so we'll start there of really looking at economic vitality as a $50 million. It's a new one we haven't had before within sales tax. And this really is looking at, we kind of divide it up into 3 buckets, and that's what we'll kind of talk through today. And what does that really look like, and some examples of how we would approach this economic vitality fund. But it's really focused on housing and workforce needs. And when we talk about housing, I'm going to talk kind of globally about single family housing, multifamily housing, and senior housing. So those are how we're kind of looking at it. And also that multifamily housing really in the downtown area where it's needed, and single family housing throughout, as well as senior housing. So just wanted to kind of preface that in case I forget to make those details, but that's how we're approaching and looking at housing as a collective. And really within this, we're looking at how do we create additional housing? How do we support existing affordable housing? And then how do we really look at our workforce development in terms of entrepreneurship and supporting local businesses? So I'll kind of go through all of those. It's always good to kind of go back to the work that's already been done with the Maxfield study, and this is really related to how we've started to approach all of these and really build it out. And looking at the top 5 housing priorities, which is new home ownership opportunities, increasing home ownership for people of color, housing for those earning less than 50% of area median income, creating additional senior housing options, and the preservation of our current housing stock. And then really wanted to kind of get into kind of where we're at in terms of kind of making some notes in terms of the supply of owner occupied homes. There's a market demand for 5,628 for sale homes between 2020 and 2030. Our current production rates would only produce about 68% of that market demand over the next decade. So we recognize there is a need there of where we need to kind of be part of that market and really helping encourage additional housing. And really an estimated 964 sale homes are needed annually to meet the market demand by 2030. And then we also really saw and are seeing some shortfalls when it comes to multifamily units in the downtown of about 3,000 units needed as we continue to grow, and the demand for about 919 senior housing units. So we recognize that there's a very significant demand for housing by 2030 to really accomplish what we need with that. And so with that, we have started to identify with them, and I'll kind of go into details of the first 2 buckets and kind of get an overview, and then I'll provide some examples. One is housing creation, really looking at within this infrastructure investment, and I'll get into one example about potentially sewer, but another could be that we might need a road that will connect where there's existing utilities, and all of those exist, but without that road. And that could be an opportunity within infrastructure investment as we look at it, of how do we make that connection to open up where there is available land that is served by infrastructure. We kind of will look at tax abatement, and we kind of have a proposed pilot program as it relates to that. And then also looking at our fee waiver, which is something we have been doing with our fee waiver program. And I'll have a little bit of an update on that in terms of being able to continue that going forward with some more secure funding. We had used some of the about 500,000 before, and I'll kind of go through that overview. And then housing preservation and support is really looking at both how do we support existing housing through housing rehabilitation program. We currently do have some funding that we use from our community development block grant funding. How do we kind of extend that to really address and kind of maintain that naturally occurring affordable housing throughout the city and be able to continue to move that forward and be able to provide that support. Increasing density construction loans is really being able to continue our pilot program for accessory dwelling units of how we can bring additional density into single family areas where it's appropriate, and being able to continue that program with another source of funding. And then we also, when under the housing preservation and support, we also look at where there are existing infrastructure and those lots that are already platted. How can we support and get those houses built in those areas? So we're kind of looking with the housing creation is we might need infrastructure and it's vacant land right now. Housing preservation and support, it could be that there's a platted lot and it's just vacant, and how do we support both of those? I wanted to go into kind of one of our pilots that we kind of have been discussing is really focused on platted lots and subdivisions. And part of the challenge is when when lots are platted, they start to have property taxes increase right away. So what we're seeing is some developers only plot maybe 10 lots a year because they know they can build those and sell those that year. And so that process takes a bit longer. And so how can we support and offset some of those potential taxes so that they can plot more lots ahead of time and increase the efficiency of that? Really trying to make sure that we can kind of help provide that incentive for them so that we're not waiting, okay, we have to go through 10 lots, we got to come back through another 10. How can we kind of help move that process a little bit along? And so that's why we kind of have been looking at this potential pilot of single family development and how we can incentivize that. And as a way to kind of help facilitate bringing additional housing units on. I think this slide should have been before. In terms of fee reimbursement, I just want to kind of get a brief summary of where we've been and what does that really look like in terms of we've had support for about 36 units are the remaining under Mayo Wood 2, in addition to the 33 homes that have been supported by the fee reimbursement program. This has been about $20,000 per available per unit. Something that we can also look at with the fee reimbursement and continue it is whether we drop it to $15,000 and then be able to support additional, or we keep it at the 20,000. We're kind of anticipating that that would be kind of where the fees land, but that is an option as well when we look at the fee reimbursement program. We've seen good success with this in terms of looking at the housing prices and be able to support that and helping to layer in some of this for what we're hearing back from developers in terms of where there's available support and being able to waive or provide that reimbursement of those fees. This is, when we talk about infrastructure, another opportunity that we're kind of seeing, and I kind of wanted to use an example that you guys have seen a few different times, in terms of like where there was an expansion of into the West Zumbro, and what did that do in terms of opening up additional land, and be able to create opportunities for additional development, and how does that look? This is an opportunity we can look at within economic vitality. I will note that one of the ways you guys will also have an impact is, I think in March 26th, there's going to be a growth management plan discussion. And as part of that, both planning and public works have been meeting to identify what areas might make sense in terms of, is there a potential next project and where does that look like and what makes the most sense? And some of that would help inform this funding as we move forward in terms of what might be another area where we need additional sewer capacity, and that will result in additional land that can be used for additional housing. One of the other items I also wanted to kind of talk through when it comes to housing is we're really also looking at how do we layer various tools. One of them being housing TIF. It's one of those things I think that's come up, and this isn't directly supported through the local option sales tax, but it's something we're looking at is how do we start to layer these things to support housing. And I will also note that part of it, we haven't really done too much with single family owner occupied housing when it relates to TIF. One of the things you'll see probably, I think at the end of next month, is we're doing a study session on our TIF policy and kind of really looking at where our policy is and what makes sense, and if there needs to be some adjustments so that we can continue to support both all kinds of development, including downtown development in terms of housing or single family housing. And then the last kind of, I'm going to say the third pot of money is really focused on workforce and business development. And this is really working with our partners a lot. There's a couple different items within that. One is adaptive reuse. And I'll kind of go through one. We're looking at that is how we talked about for supporting historic property owners and businesses under adaptive reuse, but also being able to support the conversion of upper story commercial space to housing where it makes sense, being able to leverage that with some other funding. There has been some discussion about some other state tax credits that might be out and how can we match those up and leverage those as well, but really an opportunity to be able to support both a downtown commercial space and transfer that to housing if it's available. Really the workforce initiatives and entrepreneurial support and the economic development contribution of really establishing, looking, continuing that revolving loan fund, and really what does that help build out, and looking at the one that was done prior under the sales tax, what makes sense as we continue those conversation of building out that revolving loan fund, and then really identifying our overall entrepreneurial ecosystem of like where are there gaps right now in terms of workforce initiatives and entrepreneur support, and meeting with partners to really fully build out what does that look like. There are a lot of great programs we already have, so we don't want to compete with those. We really want to be able to extend them or fill in gaps that are identified. So we continue to work with our partners on identifying those. In terms of, I'll go next steps, and then we're still kind of, one of our major next steps is identifying performance measures. What we recognize, and I just also want to make clear, is that what this is going to be, economic vitality could change in a couple years in terms of what those needs are. So what we really want to establish metrics and ways to measure this so that we can kind of come back and say, yes, this program is working. And if it's not, then we can come back and make tweaks, because we want to make sure that we're responding to what's needed out there in terms of the economy and housing. I think we have some really good basis in terms of programs that we've used and that we're seeing working, but we also recognize 5 years from now it could be very different. And so we really think those performance metrics are going to be really important for this, and to be able to present to the council on an annual basis or as needed. And we also really also just want to make sure we're looking for ways that we can leverage our funding with economic vitality with other sources of funding. And that's something we continue to look at. And I also did have the slide that you will see all of these again. I feel like you've seen it a couple of times, but just to recognize that these will all have to come back before you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Woodward. I was just at the Economic Development Association Minnesota conference last Thursday, and housing and very creative strategies for how we're financing, funding, and thinking through regulatory barriers was the center of many presentations. I forgot my notes and I don't have access to the presentations yet, but you've mentioned several of the strategies that were brought up, but I'll share that as soon as I get it, because it does have a few other ideas that we can use as well. I know the main theme was the market is such that it takes public investment to make these projects work. And also we need our developers and builders to come to the table too and think together about how we do this. And I think we're good at that in Rochester, but there's room for continuing improvement to really address what we're facing here, which is something we've never seen before. So like that, I love the adaptive reuse and thinking through the commercial office space transition to housing. I think we have to do that, and hoping DMC can also play a role in that. So thank you for mentioning that. And then I would just add, I know it was sort of tucked in there at the end around the like true economic development, workforce investment, and the revolving loan economic development fund. But that's a really critical piece of that. We need that as a resource in our community. So I'm glad you're continuing those conversations with Ready and partners about how to make sure that's shaped as it should be in today's context, but we're continuing to invest. So thank you. Councilmember Wall, then Palmer.
Thank you. I'm really pleased with the strides that we can make forward with housing. So all of the many initiatives that we have talked about in many different ways, well, I sure hope that can help be part of an answer. Within the last 11 million of which you spoke, considering that downtown has been such a focus for the city and for the council for many years, including last year's task force, downtown task force, and the historic district. Is there any room in that last 11 million for support of the historic district?
Yeah, I think we were anticipating under that adaptive reuse kind of category, which also some of that support for historic district in terms of that revolving loan fund and identifying that to be able to support business owners and property owners. So that was included as one of our recommendations.
I'm not sure that loans or revolving loan fund is exactly what many are looking for, but a grant assistance, we've talked about that on this dais before too.
We're talking about that at DMC on Thursday's meeting.
Continuing to add a little pressure.
I know. I'm carrying the pressure with me. Councilmember Palmer.
Well, I got about 5 different things here. So I'll start backwards to go adaptive reuse downtown. I mean, anything that you read it's not easy to do and really hard to do. If you do from commercial to residential, you lose your property tax base, which isn't good. There are very few buildings that really qualify, and if you follow it, that's tough. Obviously, I'm not for the historic district using sales tax dollars because that's not what we said that we're going to use it for. Couple questions for you. You have natural occurring, and in my opinion, that definition means it just happens without government. Are you talking that government's going to be involved with natural occurring?
I think what I'm talking about naturally occurring affordable housing is being able to support that existing housing with potentially housing rehabilitation funds, where often sometimes homeowners need to update and there might be some income restrictions that they have where they might not be able to do it themselves, and that we could support them in that.
Okay, but and what I've read about natural occurring is government doesn't have anything to do with it. So if you're going to incentivize single family existing, that's different in my definitions. So,
In order to maintain it as it is, those properties need to be
so that's
and
a,
updated.
but that's a government assisted, not natural occurring.
Well, it is naturally occurring as it stands, but in order to continue to be naturally occurring or to be affordable without being naturally occurring.
Well, they're two different
Yes.
things. And so I think that's a tough thing to do.
Pause for 1 second. Ms. Elms wants to.
So maybe an example of this, still getting at your naturally reoccurring, so felt important to touch on that while you're discussing it. Happy to not do that if that's the preference of the city council. I do think that there is a component of this that is, we have this naturally occurring. If it falls to a standard of maintenance that someone can't really reside there anymore, it gets gobbled up at a low cost, flipped to a higher cost residential property. That would be something that you would be mitigating against. Yes, that would be influenced by ability for current or other individuals to be able to have access to a property that otherwise might fall to someone coming and buying it and flipping it into something that maybe would be an Airbnb or something, or even just a more expensive home based on their ability to buy it at a lower cost from somebody who can't afford to stay there and make the improvements that are necessary. So the other thing that happens with this is one of the goals of all of these different ideas is to create a market condition that becomes naturally occurring because there's additional inventory in the market that provides a different market value across the housing spectrum. So yes, government intervention, however, it's to keep that what was naturally occurring from becoming a higher cost home because the individual might not be able to invest in their home and might fall to the point where they needed to actually fall out of the home, in which case oftentimes people buy those and they don't stay affordable. Go ahead.
I guess a discussion there on definitions. And so originally you started talking about multifamily downtown. I would think that we wouldn't use any sales tax dollars for that. The BDMC is funding that. In my understanding of the apartment buildings downtown, that we're just about where we need to be as far as having them come along on board. So I would not be in favor of spending any money on the multifamily downtown. Economic development you're talking about, it, in my understanding is that we're going to reload the investment in businesses. And when we do that, my understanding is that you want to have different businesses come to town, help incentivize that. And part of that, a small part of that is how many employees they bring on. Is that what we're talking about?
I think there's a couple different elements under that economic development. One is being able to support existing or new businesses, but there's also a need for like development of workforce, which I would say is a separate category. Like potentially the revolving loan fund of working with Ready, but then also potentially working with other partners of how do we bring along other entrepreneurs and provide initial support that might not be over there. So there's kind of a continuum along the way of how do you support growing the workforce? How do we support the existing population of being able to get into some of these jobs that are there, and how do we build that out? Because there's also a huge need for workforce in the Rochester area. So I would say there's multitude of things within that economic development category that we're kind of identifying.
So what I'm saying is that if you have refund this revolving fund, so it keeps going to make businesses come to Rochester to kind of diversify from not just one employer, but obviously in the medical field in all likelihood. But on that, when I was on the Ready board, we had investments that were tied to, we're bringing 10 employees, we're bringing 15 employees. And what I don't want to get into is the state of Minnesota deed program where they're training employees and they're getting grants. And so just on Sunday's Tribune, there's a huge article on the deed program coming in and helping out with construction workers coming into the field. So, you know, the city is here. I don't want to have slop into the deed program where they have a great program.
Like duplicate, you mean? Or
Well,
trying to
duplicate, you replicate, and that's what we would be doing is, hearing.
No, I don't think our intent is to duplicate. It's to identify what those needs are for Rochester and build out that revolving loan fund, similar to what we already have one in existence and what makes sense. And that does generally include some job creation elements to it. But we're going to work with our partner to fully identify like what are those guidelines so that we're not duplicating other efforts and that we're being able to address the needs of the community in terms of the business community and where we see growth opportunities.
I think that's what she means by modernizing it and putting it in the current context, including what other programs exist today that maybe didn't when, you know.
And I agree with your original statement is that we don't know what we're gonna be doing in 3 to 5 years and we need to let
Right,
this
and-
evolve. And I understand that. And so I don't want to throw a program out because, oh geez, you know, but I mean, if we spend $300,000 a year investing in businesses, that's not a lot of money. And if you take, 15 years and divide what we're gonna do, I don't see that as a large amount of money to have to invest in other businesses coming to Rochester.
Or growing businesses within Rochester.
Or growing business. I'm not, no, I'm not against that. Okay. As far as the housing, the owner occupied single family dwellings, obviously we were way behind on that. I think your numbers were that might hit 60%. I'd say we're hit about 40%. If we do 200 houses a year for 10 years, that's, 2,000 houses and we're not going to hit that number. And obviously been on that soapbox for a long period of time. So I think owner occupied single family dwellings is where we need to be building wealth. And if you look at the BIPOC community, they're at about 22% home ownership. That number needs to grow a lot. And so how do we do that? How do we invest in that? So I think our partners with the coalition, our partners with the county and the city, I think we have a great opportunity to move that number and get more occupied homes built in Rochester again.
Great. Is that it?
Yep, thanks.
All right, Councilmember Bransford.
So I'd actually like to go to, I don't know what, it's 34, I think, slide 34, shortfalls. 34. Yep. So as I'm tutored in housing and urban settings, and read on it myself and see trends in other cities, and then in light of some of the discussion of single family homes and ownership, I think that it's not an either or. I think we can have an and or a yes and. I don't think there needs to necessarily be 2 columns here. This is less a question and more of a comment, I suppose. But we see some evolution in downtown areas where you go to these pocket neighborhoods where you have higher density and then you have like row homes, townhomes, 4plexes, 8plexes. With yards and for sale. And I think one way we can get to a place where people can build wealth, generational wealth, home ownership, isn't necessarily with your traditional single family home. I think there's an opportunity for the density version of single family homes. And it sort of sounds like we're saying, well, we want big apartment buildings downtown, or we want single family homes on the outskirts of town. I think we have enough room downtown, both in our current updates to like R2X and our future land use map, which I'm hoping that we'll get to sooner rather than later, that we can reimagine some parts of neighborhoods that are really only VRBOs and Airbnbs that get snapped up by investors and then are just taken off the market. My hope is that in some strategic locations in the downtown area and in the DMC zone, we can get a little creative about how to provide that housing that includes ownership options and would include workforce housing, that would include senior housing and sort of these mixed use pocket neighborhoods. And I'm going to beat that drum a little bit this year because I think that's a good way to go so that we're not kind of in this polarized, we need apartment buildings, we need single family homes. I think there's a way to be creative and combine those. Thoughts?
I think that's great.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think there are ways that we can increase density of even single family. It doesn't have to, it could be a townhome, attached townhomes as well that provide an opportunity for ownership. But you have additional density with some of those options. So I think there's a range within all of these housing. I kind of mentioned all of them, but I think within there's a range of housing types that can accomplish all of these things.
And I've actually seen those in other cities that I've been to recently, and they're just dynamite. They're really great. And there's one of the, sorry, I'm gonna get off tangent here a little bit, but there was a recent study on how loneliness is a very bad thing and a very terrible thing, and how apartment buildings in general kind of discourage fellowship with neighbors, whereas these pocket neighborhoods where they're walkable, they're yards, this I think is a win-win, because then we get more of a sense of neighborhood and a little bit more of a sense of buy-in, and people want to live there. So that's another aspect to this kind of housing that I think is really, really important.
Those words, Mayor Norton.
I'm looking at, just as I've been trying to do with the others, looking at the overall budget, and this is the same amount that roads has, 50 million or 50. Yeah. And so that comes to $3 million a year, which is almost nothing to spend. So I'm loving the conversation. I agree with the needs. I disagree with that we don't need adaptive reuse, because I think that has to be part of the solution. I love that you're thinking historic preservation. I appreciated Councilmember Wall bringing that up. So all this has been great conversation, but $3 million a year is nothing. And so I know we're going to get into a discussion I'm not going to like in just a moment, which is putting our wants over our needs. But these are needs. And we have a new announcement that says we're going to have $5 billion worth of growth and investment in our community. We know the workforce has nowhere to live. We know we have to address these things in creative ways quickly, not in 20 years. And so I'm wondering how we're going to spend more than 3 million in this area if we don't prioritize this in a different way with using more money up front, which is when we need it, which is now. So looking to see how you're going to manage that budget, unlike, like or unlike what we heard for roads.
Yeah, so Mayor, President, members of the council, I mean, I think there's a couple elements at work here. One is, I mean, at the end of the day, we have the upper end number here of 50 million to work with. And so that's what's statutorily authorized. I think when we looked at developing the recommendation, $3.3 million a year is about what we have, available over a 15-year horizon. We also know that work in this space will be consecutive. The pay-as-you-go approach really also in this space attempts to meter our staff time and effort that we have available to invest in this. With that being said, we've also talked, depending on what the initiative is, if there is a larger need on the front end in a space like this, or you could say the same thing for streets or flood, but I think again, you don't want to bond for all of this either in all likelihood, because again, we have a finite capacity to deliver these projects. But like in this particular space, if there was a larger investment within the 3.3 million a year that you have allocated, you could say, we will try to find a way to finance that larger amount. It just then reduces what you can do out in the future. So certainly, I'm not sure what that is within this, given the things that you've seen here tonight. But I think you have the ability to think creatively about that. If it said, well, we need $10 million to catalyze the blank. You could talk about, how do we do that? Probably more of an internal borrowing situation in that particular item. And we would just use some of the $3.3 million per year to pay that back over time. So I'm not saying that's impossible, but it's just at a general level, we're also trying to really tolerance what we can do with the team we have available to support the work.
Yeah, and that's going to be a discussion that will flow into the next thing as well. How much capacity can we manage continuing to build as a city, and how much can we support others doing the building rather than doing it ourselves? And housing has been the #1 identified issue since I ran for mayor, and probably even the year or two before that, because this all did start after 2008 and at the recovery after that. And so I just feel like this is the priority for the city of Rochester, is housing. And it kind of it provides me angst when I think 3 million a year or 3.5 million a year, that, I mean, that's nothing. And so if there's a way we can focus some of our funds early on our top priorities, one of which is housing, and certainly we have to make sure we don't flood and what have you too, and roads are important. But I just feel like this is an opportunity here, and I don't want to waste it waiting 5 years or 10 years because the need is today. So just however we manage that moving ahead, I just want to be on the record.
I'll hand it over to Ms. Zelms in a second, but I would say there is just a lot of interesting dynamics going on right now, that there might be a scenario in the next couple years that we do need a boost. And so it sounds like there's flexibility to make those decisions. So we aren't, if we are generally supportive of the pay as you go, that does not preclude us from saying, nope, this year we need that additional 9 million or whatever, because we have X, Y, and Z that need to happen. Is that?
Yes,
what
I
you're
agree.
saying?
I think
Okay.
if there's a particular project or a real need, I think what we are kind of leaving it, that we would come back and say, you know what, if we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and this will result in this number of housing units and help extend that, that is something we bring back before council.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Elms.
Yeah, I just think it's also really important to point out that none of this assumes that we would be building the housing ourselves. It all assumes that there would be a partner, a private partner that would be utilizing these incentives to construct. And so that is also kind of a market condition, much larger than this right now. So this isn't waiting 5 or 10 years to do something. It's being strategic about having progress on all of the things that everyone voted for in the city of Rochester.
All right, Councilmember Keen, then Palmer.
Yeah, again, I just trying to bring this up a notch a little bit. I think what I'm seeing here is the staff is recommending about an 80% of the economic vitality funds invested in housing, and the other balance, the 20% into both workforce and business initiatives. And again, at a high level, I'm good with that. I guess the thing what that crosses my mind going through this is, we talk about, addressing the housing problem. I don't think people realize how fast $3 million disappears when you're trying to say you have a housing shortage of 200 units. I mean, it is a huge problem, and it's not going to be addressed because we passed, where it's not going to be resolved in the next 5 or 10 years because we passed sales tax. This is a much larger, and it's the problem that comes with economic growth. And we're not experiencing it alone in this country. Most places that have growth going on have these big problems of the real estate values way above where the majority of the workforce can afford them. And we're going to continue to work with partners like the coalition, like the county, the housing authority, and try to come to bear on these in some way. And I think that's the message I was drawing out of this today.
Yes.
Right. Did you want to say
I
something?
think the other element that I feel like should be just addressed too is, I think the adoption of the Unified Development Code also really helps set the framework in that regulatory environment to help really bring on additional housing as well. So I think that was also a really important component to all this overall picture.
Good point. Thank you.
For sure. Mr. Palmer.
I'll be real quick. Home ownership is what I was talking about. If you can get eightplexes that can have home ownership, I'm all for that. I'm all for row houses. To say that this money wouldn't help much, the staff has already said that they could do 100 houses with $20,000 of fee reimbursement for each house. That's a help. And if we do TIF, if you can do TIF at $20,000 a lot, that's $40,000. That's a start. That's a lot more than what we have been doing, a lot more than other communities are doing. And I'm gonna jump on this bandwagon or say it again, is Rochester, Olmsted County Coalition is set to do something really big, and we can do it with the sales tax dollars. This will be a starter for it, and that's where I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and gratitude for the other organizations in our community that are working together and committing their resources well to help address these challenges. So any other final discussion? Thank you, Ms. Woodward.
Thank you.
The mayor was going to step out for this next conversation. I think we can do this last. Everybody okay? You okay to present?
I'm great
Okay.
to go, yeah.
Welcome.
I'm the parks, what was it, extraordinaire, something like that, yes. Yes, Mayor, President, members of the council, thanks for having me here for our fourth project to discuss a couple slides as kind of review. You've seen these before in the presentation from last summer. Again, this is for the Regional Sports and Recreation Complex and an investment of $65 million. A couple of renderings here from the work that was done last summer, highlighting the indoor and outdoor space that was kind of envisioned through that process of community engagement and the other consultant help that we got here on our city team. Again, on the indoor side, we're looking at an approximately 125,000 square foot building. The main component of that being indoor flexible space that would be the equivalent of 8 full-size basketball courts, again, utilized for a lot more than just basketball, volleyball, pickleball, wrestling, arts, dance, etc. Some opportunities for other things in that space, indoor play, a little bit of flex turf space, some community space, and then the support areas needed. Also highlighted here are a couple opportunities for future expansion, or if we had a private partner come along to help expand some of these things as we get started. On the outdoor side, again, overall, we're looking for around 75 to 90 acres of space. The main components outdoors would be 12 multi-purpose artificial turf fields, and 12 outdoor pickleball courts, looking for the supporting parking, circulation, playground, concessions, and other things outside to support it and make it a destination location for recreation. Then getting into some new components, kind of what we've been working on since the vote was approved in November. We've gotten an internal team set up with staff members from parks, admin, community development, communications, just trying to really round out the different components we feel will be important for this project. Another part of that would be, again, still recognizing the need and the desire to keep our community engaged, working with our local partners, whether they're the local sports groups or organizations like Rochester Sports or Rochester Sports Foundation. We really want to set up this facility to be one that'll be well utilized and a great place for regional tournaments to come and happen in this facility, but also be a great resource for our community members. As we've started to put these kind of bubbles together, we've also been working on a game plan of how to move forward. And we really feel the two places to start with this: first, site acquisition, one of the very common questions we got during the information sessions through the fall, really identifying that site, and then getting into land acquisition and making sure that it's a feasible location to have the facility built. And then the other part would be operations. We really felt it was important to get started on the operations plan, looking at what model we'll use there. Again, bringing those decisions back to council to be made and to be discussed. But looking at what that would be, bringing that, if it is a private operator, which we'll get to that in a couple slides, is the way the staff is leaning at the moment, having them on board early on so they can be part of the design and part of the feasibility and make sure that it's a facility that we can again be utilizing to the best we can over the years to come, as well as leveraging the expertise that operator will bring with them from the facilities that they would run already and be able to provide that insight to us as we move forward. We saw these items also last summer, but just again, site selection criteria, things that we're making sure we keep in front of us as we look at the sites that we've been evaluating over the last few weeks. Again, property size, and then the access and things like that were all important and identified both by us as an internal team as well as the consultant team from last summer. Another item we've been working on is kind of laying out a general schedule of how we think and hope things can move forward, kind of making a plan, again, trying to make this to be a maybe slightly aggressive, but also realistic plan of what we can do. This, again, assumes that we would borrow for the funds in order to start down the road here on these expenses in the near future. Again, working on things like the site selection and operating model now and starting to get later this year into design, acquiring the site, and then ultimately construction potentially happening in 24 or through 25 through 26, and have a grand opening hopefully by the end of 2026. Lots of different checkpoints along the way, of course, but this is just kind of a general schedule for everyone to see where we're at right now. We've been working within that site acquisition bubble to identify, again, also looking at the information the consultant team put together for us of our kind of key 5 criteria we think will be important when we're looking at a site. These, again, would be making it very accessible that both visitors to Rochester can get to this facility easily, but also make it accessible for our local community members, having that public transport and things like that, and having it be a place, again, that our Rochester residents can get to and enjoy. Looking at this in the big picture of how can it be a catalyst for future development? What can this mean for our, kind of local economic vibrancy? And part of that being looking for a parcel that would be large enough to accommodate several initiatives and priorities. So something more in that 100-acre space, if we can find the right site for that. And again, that would create some future expansion or other development right around the area. Again, a couple of things that'll definitely come back to will be the cost and our ability to acquire that site. So as we've so far, we've taken these criteria and some others, quantitative things, we've put them into GIS, come out with, so far we've looked at about 9 or 10 different properties that we're aware of that meet most or all of these criteria. And then the next steps will be really start to dig into the cost and if and how we can acquire those locations and just start to get into that next step. So that's kind of where we're at on the site acquisition. Getting into the operating model. So again, this was the second part, site acquisition operating model, the 2 places we felt were important to start down the road here on this process. But you can see the star on the continuum there leaning towards private operations. We feel having a private operator who will do things like the day-to-day management, marketing, sales, securing those tournaments to bring in, and having an agreement set up between the city and that third party to handle those things. Again, bringing them in early on so they can be involved with design and feasibility planning, and again, lend their expertise to the process of leading up to having the facility open. There'll still be some public component to it. Obviously, this will all happen by agreement that'll come back before the policymakers. We definitely heard that it was important to have access to the facility and make it affordable. And we firmly believe that as well, that it needs to be a facility that Rochester residents can go to and enjoy and have access to prime times and not just be a tournament facility or facility for only a few. We really want it to be a facility that all of Rochester can go and attend and participate in activities there. And as well, being a city asset, we want to make sure that it's maintained appropriately, and that all would be spelled out within that agreement. And we would have the public collaboration on that part as well to make sure that long-term, again, it's a great generational long-term facility that can be held up in good condition and for generations to come. So, what is the process going to look like for identifying that operator? This is how we envision it happening, and how other facilities have done a similar process. Get that RFP out there, get back some qualifications, references, go through the interview process, have them well vetted, negotiate through a preliminary agreement. What that really means is bringing them on here at this front end time where they can be part of that design and process. So they would help through all of that process, then have a final operating agreement that we would set up with them when it's time for that facility to open. So I buzzed through that really quick, and I will turn over one slide here to Mr. Parrish.
Yeah, and we'll get Ben back for questions, but we've had sort of this underlying conversation, whether it be in the supporting transformation presentation you saw at the last study session, or just even how we intend to deliver some of the sales tax. One recommendation that we will advance forward to you for consideration on this, and would love feedback on, it's just this is an example of how we can rethink our existing staffing models to help us through, this peaking that we're going through, whether it be, both forward and bound, sales tax, our ongoing commitment investment in DMC and many other areas. So we currently have a manager of facilities and property, Scott, who you're familiar with, and you'll be talking to in this closed session, is going to be retiring in 26. And so what we're suggesting here is, we have a number of projects that, we need strategic facilities leadership on, including this project. Of course, we have our users, and Ben's representing the parks team, from that perspective. And, we'd have an operator's perspective, but just someone that wants to think about how we own this asset in the long term. And we haven't always done that. We've really been programmatic first, long-term ownership second. And we don't want to lose that when we're making these investments. And so um, this model would allow, Scott to pivot into more of a facilities consultant role on us, still be a city employee with us rather, and, potentially then retire in 26. In the meantime, we would post his position. We have a talented individual in the department as the current facilities supervisor. Certainly would be a candidate for the position. We go through conventional recruitments on these, but, we are committed to growing our own lease. And, this is another thing that would help sort of fill a gap that we have now. And then allow Scott to really focus on his current DBET work, bringing these downtown mechanical projects home and downtown district energy, parks maintenance addition to the PWTOC campus, as well as providing kind of that strategic perspective on the leadership team for this project. So, we would look at that as a project expense. And then as a good succession, all good succession planning efforts are, in 26, Scott retires, assuming we're not in this peaking environment, then we have the opportunity to go back to our regular complement of FTEs, and we haven't sort of grown in that space beyond what is currently needed. So we'll talk a lot more about ideas like this at the next study session where we talk about supporting transformation part 2. But this is one idea that we have in order to help, advance this important work. So with that, I want to, I'll stand for any questions there. But otherwise, bring Ben back up for, I'm sure, what's a few questions in the regional sports and recreation facility space.
This is really exciting and a lot to process, but I will turn it over to Councilmember Bransford to start us off.
Thank you, Ben. Great presentation. Just one comment that, because I was on an email today. I see a cluster of diamonds in the outfields for baseball, and that makes me very happy, and I hope they stay there. Because our baseball fields are in need of a little TLC. One thing, I just wanted, I don't really have a question so much as a comment that this is a really exciting project because it's gonna create jobs. This is as important to me in my mind as the Rochester Civic Center. Replacing the Y, the new pool we have, these kinds of regional projects like that are going to draw a lot of tourism money. I'm sure the business owners would be delighted. And so I'm really pleased with what I'm seeing here in terms of the design. Do you have there is a question. Do you have a feeling when some of the internal and external, inside and outside facilities, basketball courts, baseball fields, and when might that firm up and when might that come back before the city council, or are we actually going to even decide on the overall design for it, or are we just approving, what we see?
Yeah, so you'll certainly have the opportunity as the RFPs come in for design, we'll bring back our recommendation and they would be up for the city council approval for who is selected as a firm to be the design. And I would just mention that as we talked about last summer, kind of the bubbles that are on that screen for the design, that's in the 5 to 10% range, right? There's a lot of work to do there. And I think as we get in this initial phase of an operator, part of that will be a more in-depth feasibility about, having additional conversations with the local sports groups or the tournament hosts in the region, those kinds of things about what can really be supported in this facility. So, to your point about the diamond fields, there could be some adjustments one way or the other as we continue that research and make sure, what's the current status and how can we project that out the next 5 to 10 years to put the right kind of amenities into the facility.
Excellent. One more question. So this came to mind, do we have any feeling for the overall economic impact in terms of dollars that a facility like this might bring to the city? I think that would be an interesting number. How many, tournaments are we going to bring in? What's the economic impact to the hotels, the restaurants, things that are really important to the economic engine that drives this city, which is no small consideration for the importance of something like this. So it'd be interesting to at least see, a back of the envelope calculation as to, speaking of economic vitality, and attracting people who, what's one thing that people decide when they go to live in a city? Parks, schools, trade, all of these things that kind of give you the heart and soul of a city. So something like this could even attract developers that want to come in, and because we're not going to create housing without developers. We don't do that ourselves. So these are the kinds of things that I think add a lot of vibrancy to this city. So hopefully, I'm just curious if we have some back of the envelope number about how much money this might inject into our economy.
Yeah, so I don't have that number right on me right now. We do work with our partners like Rochester Sports, who helps us track those kinds of things for our community. I know in 2023, they tracked, now this is all the facilities in town currently, right? But they tracked in the 35 to 40,000 hotel room nights that were tracked room nights, probably other room nights happening through Travelocity or things like that aren't tracked. But, so there are a lot of sports travel room nights happening now in a facility like this. Yeah, we certainly envision that having a major impact to that as well. Could probably come back with some more, numbers for you, like you said, but that's, look at a place like the National Volleyball Center. They have 12 to 15 tournaments during the course of the year, in addition to all the community programs that they offer through the youth volleyball leagues, adult volleyball leagues, and some basketball up at that facility already. And they track a great number of room nights at that facility. So that's one as a local case study that, I think this will be the next level of that with having both the indoor and outdoor component.
Thank you.
I think that conversation helped, and I remember seeing some other communities and what the economic impact was in those example communities, but that helps build the case for why we're doing it now instead of waiting. It is a lot for us to be doing all of these projects at once over the next 8 years, but just demonstrating what the potential benefit to the community is really important. Okay, lots of other comments, but I am curious about sites. I know that's a little bit detailed. Oh, yes.
I just wanted to point out also that from one of the other slides, depending on the property and the site selection, it has some pretty significant potential to contribute to some of your other stated goals in your strategic priorities. So depending on how the site selection is able to shake out, obviously with the core being to be able to deliver the sports facility, that there could be adjacent economic value, whether that would be housing or something else. So there is a significant economic impact. We do have significant hotel nights that are available on the weekend already in our community. And so for those existing businesses, it has significant value.
For sure. So we aren't to the point of talking about site selection, but 100 acres in the city, there are only a couple options, so. I
So
really
we've
should
actually,
be
yeah,
here.
we've put 9 properties through kind of our site criteria evaluation so far. And I had a individual contact me about another site for us to consider as well. So
Okay,
there's actually been a few more than I thought potentially
Okay.
existed, but that's kind of been the
but we
numbers
feel
we've
good
looked
about
at
that
so
there
far.
is a site
Yes.
that's gonna work.
Yeah, and I just think, of course, this is always a challenge for cities when you
Yeah.
buy property. And I would just say, much like you're going to go into closed session in a moment to review the purchase price of property, we would run that through the similar process where
Sure.
when we determine that we have opportunities or, maybe a couple sites that we're considering, depending on all the factors that you saw, ultimately our team working on this with probably some outside support would bring forward a recommendation in a closed session. For
I
the
just
council.
wanted to hear him say there are a number of sites they're considering. Yes, so appreciate that. All right, we've got Councilmember Keen and then Palmer, then Wall.
Yeah, thanks. One of the things when I look at something like this, just to trying to get some key measurements in my mind, would you say we're looking at like 40% of our cost is site acquisition, or is it 30%, or what are we projecting there?
That's a great question.
Okay, I mean, there's a lot of variability. Let me lead through this. I don't want to be in part of this and I want to start talking about what the possibilities are. How are we prepared for potential overruns?
Yeah, another great question. You know, we realize our 65 million when we have to take into account all the components of what that's going to take is going to be really tight, right? That's why some of the things up there were earmarked towards future expansion. I think that's probably our answer.
That's the
is
variability
we-
as what we will do and what we won't be able to do.
Yep, and
Okay.
I mean, obviously, we want to deliver, the first state opens, we want to deliver a facility that's going to be a great asset for our community, right? So we don't want to underdo that, but we realize things like bringing make sure we have utilities at the site, doing land, land contouring and all the kind of things that are going to need to come into it, depending what the site is. That's why it's helpful for us to go through that criteria to identify the sites that maybe would be a lower cost in some of those different components. But yeah,
Yeah,
I think
we're
that's
not
where
going
we're
to
at.
talk it through tonight, but those are the kind of worries I have when we go through it. And I'm watching that because I think that the location is important. I don't know what all the criteria, but there are probably some pretty big differences in cost. It appears we have the right people in place. My other question or thing I'm trying to make sure I have the right mental model for as we get into this. I really liked how you laid out internal, run, totally outside, hybrid, and then like where we're at with that. I have this model that I watched us try to figure out how to do 125 and then other things like how we run the ice rinks. My mental model here is much more like the Mayo Civic Center. Do you think that's what it looks like, or is it closer to something like 125?
I think it's probably closer to like what Mayo Civic Center is, with us potentially having a little more involvement with upkeep and capital improvement over time. But again, we'll be going through that process of developing the scope of an RFP and getting that out there and, fine tuning where that's at. But that's what's in my head right now.
Last thing, Ben, and then when you say when we're in that state, is the city administration and the council in that contract, or is Park and Rec in the middle of it?
The contract would come back to city council.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, going to Councilmember Wall, then Mayor, then Palmer.
I was after Palmer.
No,
Yes, I was.
that's okay.
Thank you. I think, Mark, that we already did get some back of the envelope figures in the initial presentations of what this could mean for us. As I remember, there was a low, a mid, and a high, and I don't want to be absolutely committed to figures, but I think the low was about 12 million annually to a high of about 46 million that this could return to the city in economic development.
You have a better memory than I do. Thank you.
I see this as a huge opportunity. Thanks, Ben. I really appreciate what you've done through the course of the sales tax presentations. Believe this was a clincher for the approval of the vote. Yesterday, 2 days ago, I had the pleasure of being at the Century High School Wrestling Tournament at the same time as the National Volleyball Center held a tournament. I parked in a Yoda and walked in. This next weekend, I'll be in two different suburbs of the Twin Cities for hockey and for basketball. People really are looking for places and opportunities. And so for us to provide that, as well as the economic development, and to provide opportunities for our own residents to take part in a great new facility that will add to who we are as a city. Boy, this is really a good and exciting project, and I'm happy to support it and the funding that proposal that has been offered to us for this night.
Thank you, Mr. Wall. Councilmember Palmer.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the great presentation. It's exciting to see. The number one question I get from everybody, and I'm going to go back on President Brook. We have no location already decided. It's going to go out. We're looking. Is that not correct?
Correct.
We have
We
no
are looking.
location in our head, right?
Correct.
Okay, so I can stop that rumor that we know a place that we're going to go.
We do not know I don't know. Nobody's told me the place, I guess.
No one told me the place. Okay. I just noticed on the roads that you had I-90 in there. I didn't know Rochester had property along I-90. Why are you looking at I-90?
just access from it, right? So if you're coming in on 90, whether it's off of 52 or 63, can it be easily, gotten to compared to some other parts of the community? So that just those access from the major roadways is what we're looking for.
Okay. I mean, you can get across Rochester in 15 minutes, so
Yeah.
I'm excited for this. I hear nothing but great things from the community on it, so thank you.
It's just one of the criteria, right? There's a
I
lot of criteria.
appreciate the
Ward
understanding.
5.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, Mayor.
Just a couple things. I am excited that we are having these discussions. I will say a couple things. One, I'm surprised we're moving this up as quickly as we are for several reasons, partly because we have a huge list of projects already in the queue, and we could have waited a couple years before we jumped on this in order to not complicate the staff's already very busy timeline. I'm already being told that they're overburdened. And so we're adding a huge new task to this, to their work. And in my mind, as I mentioned before, I think our priorities are the needs, the roads, housing as top priorities. If we can do all four at the same time and not overburden our staff and not have to purchase a ton more staff or not have to contract for a ton more, and we can do it within our current budget and the lost local option sales tax, so be it. I do have, I had two things. One, yes, there's an economic development component to this. I carried the volleyball center. I remember having these exact same arguments when we built the volleyball center. It's going to fill the hotels, and we have those arguments. And with the regional sports complex, we had that same argument for the regional sports complex out at RCTC when that was funded. So, but I think we need to be realistic in that depending on where this is built, there will be new additions. People won't necessarily come downtown. They may build new hotels. We may end up with more development, not just housing, out where this is. So I think we just have to temper our enthusiasm and understand that our downtown hotels may not see the benefit of this. It may be other hotels. We'll have to wait and see because we don't know yet. But all economic development is good. So if we have more buildings, that's fine. I do want to ask about the dollars to run and upkeep this. So the one question I have is the ongoing costs for management of our sporting facilities. That's been kind of an issue we've had since I became mayor, is the golf courses or the parks, or how do we continue to fund those? And will that come out of local option sales tax like I learned today that water does, or will that be out of our general fund or out of the park department, or will that solely come out of the, I can't believe it will be, but solely come out of the vendor for upkeep? So that was one question that I had. And the other was, I wanted to say that I love the idea of community access. I really appreciated that you said that, because there has been concern in the community that this will only be for competitions and filling hotels. And it's not about the kids who live here, or the families who live here, or adults who want to play softball. And I want to make sure that we think about that, not just for this facility, but for all our facilities, including the rec center and others, that we really think about community access to all of our amenities and make sure that everybody has access. So, but if you could answer the question about the capital outlay and ongoing expenses and how we'll fund those through lost or through something else.
Sure.
And
So,
maybe just add on a justification from your perspective of why we are moving ahead right now.
yeah, I guess a couple reasons for me that come back to justification are the needs that are in our community. We have groups in town that aren't able to access a facility right now for their need, whether it's baseball or basketball, soccer. There's many, right? We've had many meetings with soccer. The mayor and I have had many meetings with some soccer groups, right? So I think that's one reason, is the need is there. Another reason is, construction costs aren't going to go down in the future. So can we, best utilize the funds that we have available and get started with this project sooner than later? Those would be a couple reasons to me. Getting back to your budgetary questions, with the consultant team from last summer, again, they kind of gave us a table with a low, a mid, and a high projections of how revenue would go. They're somewhat, I think, at least, yeah, what they provided us, the conservative projections were that on an annual budget perspective, it would be a break even or, return some money, a net profit on annual budgetary operations. When it comes to capital improvement, that was an area where they did, kind of lay out what their projected expenses would be. And we would need to figure that out a little bit. I think that's part of why, we need to do a more in-depth feasibility here upfront. So we're designing it the right way that we can maximize the occupancy of the facility and hopefully have that contribute towards capital improvement over time. So we don't have to just assume all of that through some other funding source.
And if I might just add something, sorry, over here at the end between a bunch of chairs. The other thing that we talked about and that we have done with this current 2024 budget is to look at the lodging tax as a component of these larger economic value public facilities and those that are operating more like a business, and considering how can additional lodging tax that comes in help support that additional ongoing investment, ongoing operations and ongoing investment. So that will all be part of that model. And what I can tell you is that what would have really been probably ideal for the operators of the Civic Center is if they were able to come in on the front end and inform us what kinds of decisions would be helpful or harmful to the ability to operate at a reasonable cost or no cost to the community. And then also what some of those community times are, how much those end up costing to being able to break even, which are reasonable policy decisions for the council body to make in the future, and will really benefit from, I think, what's been laid out by Ben and the team to be able to have those more informed discussions along the way.
That's exactly what was going through my head. So thanks for articulating that well. All right, Councilmember Palmer.
I'll just make a quick comment about the community use. When we did the presentations this last fall, community use was a part of this, a big part of this. And part of that was going to be cost of if you have cheap courts, well, then someone's going to have to pay for that. And how do we do that? And so community use was a big part of this. So thank you.
And just so that we don't have downtown hoteliers or businesses concerned, the Civic Center still contributes, even right now, about 8,300 room nights a year in sports related activities. So of those room nights that are referenced, many of those come from activities that happen at the Civic Center downtown. And there is a significant push to continue to expand what kinds of options they could be able to support. But there is cost to that. So really blending these to understand at what times and at what points does it make a lot of sense for something to be downtown? At what point does it not? But what we know from any other types of facilities is that there is enough to go around, and that the way that these teams travel, they're filling not just the hotels that are on the edge of town, but downtown as well.
I know my,
Just
oh,
a quick point to
go
just
ahead.
back that up is that when there was the Legion tournament last year for baseball, there was buses everywhere. A lot of kids stayed near and in downtown and bused to some of, because our baseball fields are sort of spread to the four winds. This would help that, but just so people understand, during the Legion tournament, downtown hotels definitely did benefit.
Thank you. Great presentation. All right, we're going to take just a short break before we move into our action plan. Is that all right, Mr. Parrish? You're good?
Yep.
All right, we'll reconvene at 5:40.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
All right, Mr. Parrish is here with an action plan update to share. Go ahead.
Yes, Mayor, President, members of council, I'll give you the abridged version of this. A lot of this has been covered in recent presentations and, just sort of a continuation of the exciting work. First and foremost, though, I do want to introduce a new teammate that we have. She's not new to the organization, but new to the role. So if you remember, we had our very talented Heather Heyer go to a role at the State Legislative Coordinating Commission's office to be the Director of the Economic Status of Women. I believe that's the title, but if I'm in the neighborhood, I know that. And so she's doing great, getting ready for the upcoming legislative session and that important work. We have Jessica Schuler, who is over here, joining the team, and we're super excited. And so she's going to pick up that role. She'll be our new management analyst, supporting a wide variety of things in administration, and particularly our action plan and continuous improvement efforts, evaluation work, data work. And so she's really a significant asset. We're fortunate, Jess originally joined the admin team, served there for a while. I was so sad to see her leave to the community development department to do their continuous improvement work. She also had a role in the police department as a management analyst. And now it's welcome home. We're so happy to have you back in admin and excited for that. So you'll be seeing more of Jess as we move along with this work, and we're excited to have her back with us. I don't want to reacquaint you. We've talked a lot about these, but this will be a little bit different than our previous action plan updates. We're not going to go through all the things here. We're really going to focus on your key goals. So, you have your strategic priorities and you've adopted those 3 goals at your February study session. And we'll go briefly through all these. So again, this is just the 2023 update. We're going to go over a few things with that. This again just kind of shows you the history of the action plan, which is a relatively new thing. We haven't always done this. We're just started doing it in 2021. And we plan to continue to do that. Overall, I think making good progress. This isn't all the goals. This is really some of the key ones that we have. Some are delayed, though. As you know, we've had at times to come to a council meeting and say, we're delayed or off target on something. A recent example of that was our banking relationships, whether it be locally focused or socially responsible or ESG focused lending and investments. We just haven't had the time to get to that one, but it's on the radar and it doesn't leave the action plan, just not as advanced as quickly as we would have hoped. Your top goal in the affordable living space really was to construct market rate and affordable owner occupied housing. I'm not the person that lives in this day to day, but we certainly can follow up and have team that supports. But you just had a pretty robust conversation. But just a few things, securing the sales tax was a big accomplishment in this area. It gives you the opportunity to invest $50 million. We have 950 vacant platted lots available for development, and then other land that is unplatted, but may have utilities available for future development. There was about a $2 million sewer project initiated to expand capacity in that northwest area, and so you certainly have potential for future development there. New thing with this last legislative session, we weren't exactly even asking for this, but we now have the opportunity where we're going to be getting some housing aid annually, and then in 2024, that'll be just over $500,000. And so, we'll have some opportunity to think about how we program that funding in the future to support housing initiatives, much like you just talked about. One thing the team in that area is looking at is investing in a newly created thing as well, a local housing trust fund. So a lot of momentum, but as Councilmember Palmer indicated, a lot of the feedback in this space also, comes back from our partners in the coalition. Some supplementary items in this space. We continue to try to do better in the rental inspection space. And so a lot of process improvement there, a ton of work. Actually, Jess was affiliated with some of that when she was with supporting the DSI team. And that continues to roll out. In this affordable living, as the council president sort of say, initially when we adopted this goal of affordable living, it's not just about housing, it's about how do we live affordably in the community? And I know the mayor's been a big champion of our bus stop improvement project to enhance accessibility. And so that work continues. They're working through the NEPA. We've got some federal funding. We've got some local CDBG investment, et cetera, that we're working on in that space. This other piece, another top goal of yours is really investing in public realm. And you all talked about this when you talked about the sports center concept. It's about increasing economic opportunity. It's about increasing talent attraction, which as we grow jobs in the community, we have to be a place people want to live. And so the kinds of things we're talking about here and creating quality places do that. So we have Silver's Lake, advancing. You'll hear more about that in the not too distant future. We have the Soldiers Field implementation happening at a over $20 million project. We have projects like the 6th Street Bridge, but it's also a public realm and placemaking project. About half of that project cost or better is going to public realm types of investments. And then, of course, we are, successfully delivering Discovery Walk and excited about welcoming the community into that space. So really, again, visitor experience, talent attraction, community experience, those are all key in this space, and a lot of signature projects have happened there. We also have in this same economic vibrancy and growth management space, continued evolution of our targeted business goals. So we had, our projects meeting those goals this year. I'll just say, at some point the council will see an RCA about the implementation of that. We maybe had a more aggressive idea about getting down eventually to $175,000 in project there. We're at about, I'm just off the top of my head, at about $1 million. And, we're not sure we're ready to take that next big leap. And so, we just need to have the capacity sort of catch up to the work we're trying to do there. But again, very committed in this space, but also trying to develop the capacity and infrastructure to be successful there. Huge win, the BRT project received its NEPA or an environmental review. And that really is a huge hurdle on these projects to secure. And so the team's doing an amazing amount of work, dialing in grant agreements, working toward final design and bidding, even early procurement on long lead items and things like that. And then just, again, a lot of inspection happens. This is stuff that, once the project's approved, there's a lot of things that happen. And you talk about construction activity and we talk about supporting transformation. $5 billion of, investment has a lot of inspection that wants to happen with it. And, accelerating housing investment has a lot of inspection that wants to happen. So it's the things behind the scenes that are also super important to make sure that we continue to be able to do. I'm not able to, respond deeply on this, but again, the council's third, goal here is supporting the development of the transition to the post 2030 power supply plan. I know Tim, as he's leaned into his new role as the director, is really working strong in this space with the whole RPU team behind him and the board. There'll be a more significant update to the RPU board in a few months, so I'd really encourage the council to stay tuned into that. Councilmember Keen's, of course, your representative on that board, but they're working toward a more concrete and significant update in the next couple of months. But again, continue to work toward that 100% renewable by 2030. I would just say, because this is the space, I talk in a lot. This is there's a sleeper, big deal in here about how we finance this work. And you're going to have to talk about that in the future in terms of the level of investment required to generate your own energy instead of buying it. And you'll continue to buy it, of course, but you are going to talk about how much local generation you want to have as part of this plan. And that won't be free. And there is a fairly substantial RPU revenue-based debt issuance that's being talked about there. And so I just want to, forecast that as we talk about the range of financial things. We put this into the conversation because it's, important to be thinking about, how we do that effectively. So again, great, appreciate the update for the RPU team. I know the last bullet is, they also talk about the move toward electrification, means increased levels of energy, purchasing and being able to accommodate that. And so it's all good. But if everybody in Rochester got an electric car tomorrow, that has a significant impact on our ability to provide, a good, and reliable electric system. So, they're also forecasting those ideas forward and trying to be thoughtful about that. A couple other things in this quality service space to highlight. We are behind the scenes very quietly, generating a lot of momentum on the 311 project. We hope to deliver that to you this year. We have it embedded in our communications department. We have a supervisor who has started a few weeks ago and is doing great. We have the 2 teammates that are going to be assigned into that space hired. And so, they are going to continue to build and do work. And, the software purchasing and implementations all sort of happening. But we are targeting a launch mid-2024. Really appreciate Jenna Bowman's efforts in that space. RPD, within existing resource continues to prioritize, speed education. So they've got 26 locations that they've, been working in placing speed trailers and doing work in that space on. And so that's another important kind of quality services, quality living item. In the library, continues to do work in kind of efficiency and modernization practices that they have in that space. So moving forward, couple things just in the process of our action plan that we have. We will work on a document. You're used to receiving a document. We'll work on providing that. We have our nerd team, which is our data team. A lot of organizations have a data team. We just have a way better name for it. And they're going to continue to provide feedback on how we do the action plan and evolve out. We've been talking about this and talked about it since the initiation of this, but we really do need and want to get to good KPIs so we can dashboard this work for you. I mean, this is a great presentation. I'm amazed by myself here, but we would love to be able to just graphically illustrate, here's the 3, 4, 5 things that we think it's going to be important, whether that's number of lots created or name the thing. We just need to, deliver something like that for you. A couple big data points though for us this year that inform this work. We also have the community survey coming. So think about that this fall or into the fall. You'll be receiving the results of that. We also have our every other year employee engagement survey forthcoming as well. And then we will be thinking about moving on into an evolved action plan. We've been living in this one for a bit now. I think some of the council members that have been on a while, they haven't seen a lot different on that. We have a new body of elected officials that'll start next year. We tend to align the updates of these things with that change, just so people get equity in the plans. And we have a couple of other really significant planning efforts happening in the community. We've got the comp plan update, which you'll be hearing more about at your study sessions. We have the DMC development plan update. And then really all of that hopefully translating into an update of the action plan and then set to inform that 26 and 27 budget. So we try to link the action plan and the budget together as well. And so with that, happy to answer any questions or happy to walk with you over to the closed session when you're done with all that.
All right, Councilmember Bransford.
Not really a question, I guess. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. The updates to the comp plan and some of my allusions to these reimagining of neighborhoods in the downtown area kind of go hand in hand in the sense that if this were something that we did want to emphasize, kind of that new, does this include the future land use designation? I mean, we just went through the rezone to align with the land use map. Is the next step to actually do an update to the future land use map as well?
So I'll just say as a best practice, and I'm going to defer to Cindy or Irene in a moment here. Thank you for staying. But generally, you want to update your plan every so often. Part of that is really just that. But I'll defer to Irene in terms of what they're specifically hoping to accomplish with that.
Yes, thank you. So we are required to, we should be updating. It's been about 5 years with the comprehensive plan, which is why we're kind of taking a look. I think there's a study session on an upcoming to kind of go over what we're thinking as part of what we've done with the comp plan and then where are we going in terms of updates as we will look for a consultant to assist with some of the updates, but we're expecting to kind of look at all of that together.
Okay, great, thanks.
Right, Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, again, just higher level, thanks for keeping on top of these, but I really am kind of attuned to what you're saying is like, we need to evolve these and make sure they're aligned with, the right things we're doing. And if not, we need to have those discussions. The one thing you mentioned about the KPIs, I've seen this go awry in other organizations where sometimes there's things that are easy to measure and they become your KPIs because they're already there, and it can lead you down bad paths. So that idea of like really getting on top of what are the performance indicators and not just doing the easy ones that are easy to count.
Yeah, and we have a whole appendices we normally attach to that report that has just that, or in our old missions and functions pages of the budget, we're very output focused. And of course, the goal of the KPIs is really like, are we, moving the outcome?
Yep.
And how do we measure that? Easier said than done, but certainly on point. Let's make them meaningful.
Thank you.
Mayor, and then I have a comment.
Sure. And this may have been mentioned at a past meeting, but I think given that we're having all this talk, we were silver certified at What Works Cities in the last 2 weeks. They held on to that forever and kept it under the rug. Because we are measuring and using data in ways that are driving decisions in the city that are good. So if we haven't talked about that here, I know it's out there on, social media, but I wanted to mention that and say good job to all the staff for the work that they've done in that area. I know it's a lot of work. And the other 311, I'm really excited about what's happening. I know there's a couple staff up there in the office now. And, we haven't had this, although we've had some precursors to it, including phone. But when I talk to mayors and city councils who have this, the feedback I get is if there is one thing you can do to make your constituents happy is have a 311 system, because they have a place to contact the city that's easy and they get responded to and we track it. And so I'm excited. I'm excited that I heard this year. I hope sooner rather than later we can get this off the ground, because it can make a real difference in a city with how people feel about the city, how quickly they feel they've been responded to. And it'll also ease up on staff having to answer the phone all the time, because people can just do 311 and put it in electronically, or I think you can call too, but either way. So anyway, good job.
I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, well, just on the heels of all this exciting work that we just heard about from earlier in our session. So all of these huge projects will be incorporated into the 25 to 27 plan, or how, like at what level of detail is this overall action plan?
Yeah.
Knowing that it's transforming from where it was.
And so, I mean, one of the good things with bringing Jess on the team is she's already telling me and has a million ideas about how much better, the next iteration of this is going to be. Because I mean, if you recall, we have like this base document that even has still quite a bit of things in it, which can be a lot to get through. And then we have an attachment that has even more things. And so we're trying to create some separation about what is, departmental work plans and, management kinds of agendas versus like what is the action plan items that are driving your strategic priorities.
Sure.
So we're going to try to bring it up a level. And of course, these and things we don't yet know out of these processes, will be attempted to be reflected in the updates. And so I think that's certainly on point. I think that one of the cool things though is a lot of the things you're talking about, we're in this action plan. And you're seeing the results of the work you did with laying out those strategic priorities and key goals earlier. And now we just get to, go to the next level with it.
And I would just add, staying focused and like continuing to work the plan forward to actually be able to come to fruition, and not just plan, but actually now we're in the implementation phase of that.
I know. I just am thinking of a document that Cindy has referred to that sort of integrates the timelines of some of our major projects going on. I don't know if that feels very helpful for me to see and to be able to talk about publicly. I don't know that that fits in this action plan, but some idea where we can be mapping out these big projects compared to one another.
Yeah, and I don't want to make promises on behalf of the team here, but
That's
I
fine.
will say like it might be something we can work into our supporting transformation part 2, at least working version or something. I'm just looking at Cindy because she's kind of owns that one. But I mean, I think it is helpful to understand, at least when not all the phases like design, construction, but like just that it's happening, right? And this is the time frame it's happening in. So yeah, it is powerful when it's another way to see all the things that are going on.
And I would just say, we're also trying to honor that there's a lot of work that happens across the organization that doesn't lend itself to project work, that is more iterative policy work or other types of transformation that they're trying to look at for fees or things like that. And so not all visualizations maybe are perfect for every piece of the action plan. But the goal would be to have something that's integrated and then additional ways to communicate it so that it's meaningful, to show how you're actually continuing to move it forward.
Absolutely. Mr. Palmer?
It's exciting to see 311 come on board and just the action plan of what we've accomplished and what our goals are. I think it's neat to see. And so I'm glad the staff does that and appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, welcome, Jessica, and thank you for the presentation. Administrator Zelms, you ready for the study
I
session?
am. I
schedule
actually
this
finally
week?
have the calendar up ahead of me.
All
I was
right.
prepared ahead of time. Oh my goodness gracious. Thank you, Erin. Oh, no. So anyway, the next meeting you have is on February 12th for study session. Obviously, you have a council meeting on the 5th. But that will be that supporting transformation, part 2. We don't have something else scheduled, but I think we were potentially looking at that for no, not looking at that. Anyway, you may see something else appear between now and February 12th. There is time available. I did just want to point out the reference here to comp plan update, and there's additional focus on economic development incentives, and the DEI update, at least currently, is on February 26th. So some additional updates there that also lend themselves to some of the questions and answers that came forward this evening under the sales tax presentation. So iterative work requires iterative meetings.
All right, thank you. So I will turn it over to Mr. Spindler-Craig to adjourn us to our closed session.
Thank you, Madam President, council members, Mayor Norton. This is the type of closed session that does not require a formal motion to move into the closed session, but would put on the record that pursuant to the published agenda, I would invite you to move into executive session closed pursuant to Minnesota Statutes 13D.05 subdivision 3C3 for consideration of the purchase price of property identified as Morris Memorial Subdivision Outlot A, parcel identification number 741-330-83464, will be in room 104 at the time you choose.
All right, we'll make our way down there and meet at 6:10. Thank you, everyone.
Recording stopped.